Hi, you're on the channel Truth Unraveled, Real Stories, Raw Confessions, the place where the truth doesn't knock. It kicks the door down. The baby monitor was silent for the first time all night. Our 3-year-old daughter, Lily, had finally cried herself to sleep after a feverish hour of nightmares and restless murmuring. I stood in the dim hallway outside her room, my forehead leaning against the cool wood of her door. Physically and emotionally drained, my shirt was stained with tears and baby Tylenol. I could hear the faint, familiar sounds of our house settling, the hum of the refrigerator, the drip of the kitchen sink. I needed a glass of water, maybe just a moment of quiet to reset. Before the next wake-up call, I padded softly down the stairs, avoiding the creaky step in the middle. Not wanting to break the fragile silence, I was almost at the bottom when I heard her voice. It was my wife, Sarah. Her tone was low, intimate, and laced with a frustration hadn't heard directed at me in years. It was coming from the living room, a hushed, urgent whisper. She was on the phone. I know, she was saying, a heavy sigh punctuating the words. God. Some days, I just look at them and wonder what the hell I was thinking. It feels like a life sentence. I froze on the bottom step, my hand gripping the banister so tightly the knuckles turned white. The air left my lungs. I knew I shouldn't be listening, but my feet were cemented to the spot. No, of course, I don't mean it like that, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, as if sharing a terrible secret. I love them, I do, but if I could go back, knowing what I know now, the constant screaming, the mess, the sheer loss of everything, no more spontaneity, no more peace. My career is in the toilet. Mark tries, but he doesn't get it. He thinks it's all so magical. She let out a soft, bitter laugh that felt like a shard of ice in my heart. He wanted this so badly. He never saw them for what they really are: beautiful, exhausting, life-altering mistake. The word hung in the air. Final and devastating mistake. Our children, a mistake. I stood there in the dark, the world tilting on its axis, the love of my life dissecting our family as if it were a problem to be solved, a wrong turn on a map, the children we had prayed for, the late nights we had survived together, the tiny hands that held mine. It all crumbled to dust in the wake of that single, casual wordy. Don't know how long I stood on that step. It could have been seconds. It could have been an hour. The soft click of her hanging up the phone finally broke the spell. I moved like a ghost, retreating back up the stairs and into the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the closed lid of the toilet, my head in my hands. I could hear her moving around downstairs, the normal sounds of her evening routine: filling a glass with water, closing a cupboard. The sheer normalcy of it was a surreal contrast to the nuclear bomb that had just detonated in my chest. Mistake. The word echoed, each repetition carving out a deeper hollow inside me. I thought of Lily's face when I read her a story, of our son Jack's uncontrollable giggle when I tickled him. I thought of the years of fertility struggles, the painful injections, the devastating negative tests, the overwhelming joy when we finally saw two pink lines on a stick. We had cried together on this very bathroom floor, holding each other, promising to be the best parents we could be. Had it all been a lie for her? Had she just been playing a part? The anger came later, a cold, slow-moving glacier that displaced the initial shock and grief. This wasn't a momentary lapse, a bad day comment. This was a core belief she had hidden from me for years. She saw our family, our children, as an anchor dragging her down, a chain of mistakes holding her back from the life she truly wanted. And she saw me, a naive fool who was too blind to see it, the man who didn't get it. The next morning, she acted perfectly normal. She kissed the kids goodbye, handed me a coffee, and asked about my day as if her words hadn't fundamentally shattered our universe. I looked at her, at the woman I had built a life with, and I didn't see my partner anymore. I saw a stranger who saw my children, a regret I knew then that I couldn't unhear it. I couldn't pretend the foundation wasn't just cracked. It had vaporized. My only thought, my only mission, was to protect Lily and Jack from ever feeling like they were a mistake. The days that followed were an exercise in surreal performance art. I smiled, I made dinner, I helped with bath time, all while feeling like I was watching our life play out on a television screen from a million miles away. Every time she complained about the noise, or sighed at a mess, or talked longingly about a promotion she'd missed. Her words from that night echoed in my head. I started paying closer attention, not to catch her in more lies, but to understand the depth of the disconnect. I noticed how her phone was always more interesting than Lego towers. I saw how she'd schedule work dinners on nights she knew were particularly difficult with the kids. I began recording the little things, not out of malice, but for my own sanity, to prove I wasn't going insane. The first spark of a plan didn't come from a place of vengeance, but from a deep, primal need to create a safe harbor for my children. I met with a lawyer under the guise of a will update. I sat in a sleek, quiet office and laid out my situation, not as a hurt husband, but as a terrified father. She said they were a mistake. I told him, my voice flat, the words still ash in my mouth. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s with kind eyes, nodded slowly. The court needs to see patterns, not just pain, she said gently. It needs evidence of a mindset that could be detrimental to the children's well-being. Start a journal, document everything, dates, times, context. If this is her true feeling, it will show itself again. So did I. Bought a simple notebook and began my quiet, heartbreaking documentation. It wasn't filled with rage. It was a clinical log of absence, of sighs, of missed bedtimes, of comments about my old life that the kids were too young to understand, but I knew were the tip of an iceberg. I was building a case, not for revenge, but for custody. I was building a wall around my children, using the very bricks of her neglect and regret. The transformation was internal and absolute. The hopeful, trusting husband was gone, replaced by a focused, strategic protector. I used the voice memo app on my phone when her complaints started, always careful to state the date and context aloud. First, I saved text messages where she would cancel weekend plans with the kids for a last-minute work trip that I knew was a spa weekend with her sister. I began handling everything: doctor's appointments, parent-teacher conferences, birthday, party planning, without even asking for her input, and she never seemed to notice. Relieved to be free of the burden, she was living her life, and I was quietly, meticulously building an ironclad argument for why I should be the one to raise our children. The final piece came on a Tuesday evening. She had arrived home late, stressed from a day at work. Jack, excited to see her, ran to her with a drawing he'd made. She brushed past him, heading straight for the wine fridge. Not now, Jack. Mommy's had a day, she said, her voice tight with irritation. But Mama, I made it for you, he insisted, his little face starting to crumple. She poured a large glass of wine, took a long sip, and without looking at him, said the words that would seal everything. For God's sake, Jack, I said, not now. This is why I never wanted. She stopped herself abruptly, her eyes wide as she finally registered my presence in the doorway, my phone visibly recording in my hand. The silence was deafening. She hadn't said the word kids or children, but the implication hung in the air, toxic and complete. You never wanted what, Sarah? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. She just stared at me, her face pale, the glass shaking slightly in her hand. She knew, had heard it all. The half-finished sentence was more damning than any full confession could ever be. I stopped the recording. I didn't say another word. I simply walked over, picked up a confused Jack, and carried him upstairs to read a story, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen with her wine and her regret. He filed for full custody the next morning. My lawyer's package was thick with evidence, but the centerpiece was the audio recording, her clear, frustrated voice on the baby monitor night, and the recent, damning clip of her nearly finishing her sentence to our son. We never went to a dramatic court trial. The sight of the evidence, the cold, hard proof of her own words and patterns, was enough. Her lawyer advised her to settle. She sat across from me at a mediation table weeks later, a shell of the woman I once loved, her eyes red-rimmed and angry. How could you do this to me? She whispered, her voice breaking. You recorded me on my worst days. I looked at her, not with hatred, but with a profound, unshakable calm. I did what I had to do to protect them from a mother who sees them as the worst thing that ever happened to her, I said, my voice slow and steady. You gave me the words, Sarah. You handed them to me. The settlement was signed. She got generous visitation every other weekend, But primary physical and legal custody was mine. She moved out 2 weeks later. The house, once filled with a tense, walking on eggshells anxiety, became a home again. It became loud with laughter and Lego battles and bedtime stories without sighs of resentment. The victory wasn't in winning against her. The victory was in the quiet moments that followed putting Lily to bed one night. She looked up at me, her eyes sleepy. I like it when it's just us, Daddy, she murmured. It's quieter. My heart ached and soared at the same time. She had felt it too. She had felt the unspoken tension, the burden of their mother's regret. That silence was now filled with a love that was sure, certain, and unconditional. Had used her words as a weapon, not to destroy her, but to build a new world for my children, a world where they would never, for a single second, doubt that they were the most wanted, cherished, and perfect things in my life. This has been my story on Truth Unraveled. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect your family? How do you rebuild a sense of safety for your children after a betrayal of trust? Share your story of strength and protection in the comments. Your experience might be the reassurance another parent needs to hear. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Truth Unraveled, Real Stories, Raw Confessions, and hit the bell for more stories about the difficult choices we make for love. Until next time, stay strong, stay protective, and always listen. Sometimes the truth whispers before it screams.